In the last video, we talked a little bit about Viktor Frankl's idea of how we as humans have this unique drive toward meaning, and how a lack of meaning can affect our mental well-being in ways that we don't want. Before we get into the specifics of what logotherapy is and how it works, let's get a quick bio on Viktor Frankl, his origin story. Viktor was studying psychiatry in Vienna, kind of orbiting Freud's inner circle of psychoanalysis, which, at the time, Vienna was like the Hollywood of psychology. Sigmund Freud is basically Brad Pitt, Michael B. Jordan, Nick Cage status, and Frankl is like a dude who had a few speaking lines in a Netflix series and kind of has to convince you and show you their IMDb stuff, but he was still in the mix. Frankl even talked to Freud, writing him a letter, and Freud wrote back, which is undeniably pretty tight. Basically, Frankl was on his way up in the psychology world, when all of a sudden, he was rounded up by some goddamn Nazis. And I'm talking the real deal, like whole family and almost everyone he knows dying in a concentration camp. Not those other Nazis who, disagree with people on Twitter sometimes and stuff. No, Frankl was up against the real thing, and Frankl, the little rascal that he was, somehow smuggled a manuscript he'd been working on for years, later published as The Doctor and the Soul, which would also serve as the blueprints for logotherapy, into the concentration camp, where it was eventually confiscated and destroyed. So at around 30, Frankl's family's dead, he's captured by psychos, and his life's work has been literally reduced to ash. Kinda sucks. So Frankl, now with essentially nothing, but still a psychologist at heart, studied and ministered to his peers in the camp. During this time, he noticed that the people who had a sense of meaning or purpose tended to survive way more than those who lost their sense of meaning. And it didn't have to be all that complicated or insightful. Even the people who were like, I'm gonna kill these motherfuckers when I get out of here, tended to survive more than the what is the point of everything type people. This experience cemented Frankl's original theory of humans having a serious drive toward meaning, and how a lack of meaning can have disastrous real-life consequences, which sort of rubbed up against Freud's idea, which was the popular one of the time, that we are all essentially just running off of the same bunch of instincts, and that any sense of human specialness or transcendent meaning is more or less a delusion protecting us from our innate fear of death. In fact, Freud was quoted saying, "Try and subject a number of very strongly differentiated human beings to the same amount of starvation. With the increase of the imperative need for food, all individual differences will be blotted out, and in their place, we shall see the uniform expression of one unsatisfied instinct," meaning hunger in this case. But Frankl, having been unfortunate enough to endure this hypothetical, begged to differ since he literally witnessed something very different. Of course, yes, some of the people went into animal survival mode like Freud said, but there were also plenty of others who did the opposite and seemed to rise above this utterly shitty situation by having a sense of self-transcendent purpose or duty to help others or help other people outside of themselves. And those people tended to survive, at least that's what Frankl saw. Now, quick note on the development of psychological theory. Almost every school or modality of therapy that has come out in the last 100 years at some point in their literature says something about Freud, responding to or critiquing his theories in some way.
For better or worse, we live in a world profoundly affected by Sigmund Freud.
So today we're going to talk about Freud.
So, Sigmund Freud.
And Freud's role in the development of modern culture, and it has been a very significant role.
They always have to mention Freud in his basic theory that humans are driven by instinct, but repress those instincts due to societal pressures down into the subconscious and suffer as a result. So basically, according to Freud, we're these strange beings who are perpetually frustrated since we are forced to repress our animal instincts for the sake of what he called the superego, which is a fancy word for societal norms, leaving our ego, which we can just think of as our conscious awareness, to mediate between our animal instincts and how we are expected to behave. Mental disorders, according to Freud, arise when our instincts are so unacceptable that we end up repressing them into our subconscious because facing them is too overwhelming. But once in our subconscious, these instincts influence our behavior in ways that jam us up.
I happen to be in the position where I've got to know.
Well, Mr. Cooper, I'm certain he made a commitment. He didn't give anything in writing.
Oh, he didn't give you anything in writing. All those
Smash him.
things you get in writing,
I'll smash him. I'll kill you, Father.
You must honor Father.
Yes.
And they can bring me back, firm commitments. Now, don't interrupt me when I'm telling you how...
Your father is a good man, David. Everyone knows that.
Pick up the telephone.
Honor thy father. Honor thy father. Honor thy father.
I hate him. I hate him.
Honor thy father. Honor thy father, or you will be punished.
Mr. Cooper, I'll go and see Mr. Robertson again. Thank you for letting me explain.
David's hate for Mr. Cooper is based on unconscious hate of his own father. Freud said that without insight into these dark forces, we are doomed to play out our lives in an endless dramatization of our childhood relations with our parents.
Example of this: a guy has homosexual urges. The superego isn't down with that gay shit. The guy represses his homosexual urges down into his subconscious. It's such a psychological threat that the idea of being gay is banished down to a nether realm of thoughts rather than being acknowledged and held in his conscious awareness. But the price he, or really everyone else around him, pays for his unconscious homosexuality is him walking around obsessed with how gay everyone else appears to him. He swears up and down that most of the men he meets are gay, and they secretly want to kiss and go on cowboy camping trips with him. Which is an excellent example of projection. When there is something about yourself that is so painful to think about and hold in your conscious awareness, you banish it to the subconscious, but as a result, you see it in everybody else around you. And our conscious minds are constantly overwhelmed by this battle between our innate drives and what is deemed acceptable. Okay, cool enough, but then you have Alfred Adler, one of Freud's close boys turned rival, who Frankl also studied a great deal, who hears what Freud is saying and is like, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. You know, and true, we have instincts and all, but what's really going on is that we're social creatures, and that we act not always to satisfy our instincts, but to instead move up within our social hierarchies. The will to power. Freud had the will to pleasure, Alfred Adler, will to power. So then you get Freud and Adler kind of in this, no, I'm right battle, with people being like, well, I'm a Freudian, and others being like, I'm an Adlerian. And honestly, both are pretty solid theories, but Frankl, fresh out the concentration camp and out of the clutches of those goddamn Nazis, argues that sure, these are both true in regards to the parts of human nature they describe, but either, if taken to the extreme as being totally true or false, end up painting a caricature of man. Like one of those pictures people draw on the boardwalk where you have a big-ass head and look all weird and goofy. Frankl says, if we present a man with a concept of man which is not true, we may well corrupt him. When we present man as an automaton of reflexes, as a mind machine, as a bundle of instincts, as a pawn in drives and reactions, as a mere product of instinct, heredity, and environment, we feed the nihilism to which modern man is, in any case, prone. Meaning, if we go around and telling people they're just kind of like wet biological machines, it's kind of a bummer. Thus, man is by no means merely a product of heredity and environment. There is a third element, decision. Man ultimately decides for himself, and in the end, education must be education toward the ability to decide. Frankl argues that outside of the physical instinct and psychological drive to power, there is another domain of human experience, the domain of human spirit or noetic realm, which is manifested as the will to meaning. So yeah, we all need to fap or bone, and yeah, we'd all like a raise and a promotion, but all of this stuff that drives us also has to make sense to us in a unique way that satisfies us within our context. And when I say context, I mean our family, community, society, etc. Any large group of people who expect stuff from us. Meaning this, sure, we are driven toward things like social success and contend with an instinctual animalistic side of ourselves, but it is ultimately up to us how we steer these many conflicting parts of ourselves among and through the never-ending swirl that is the wants and needs of 7 billion people being expressed simultaneously throughout the world. Logotherapy seeks to educate us in our ability to decide, to shape our behavior through values and ideals, rather than just being like, it's not my fault because I'm like an animal, or it's just business, or whatever stuff people say to let themselves off the hook from the inherent sense of responsibility that comes with being a human. Which makes sense if you think about it. We don't try tigers or lions for murder, just humans. Why? Because we assume that the majority of us kind of know what we're doing and freely decide what to do. Logotherapy acknowledges the multitude of moving parts within ourselves and doesn't deny that they are there, but instead seeks to teach us to communicate and act off of our own inner voice, or conscience, which is a word Frankl got flack for using since scientists don't really like the idea. But at the same time, our society basically rests on the fact that we can, to some degree, consciously appraise the effect our actions have on ourselves and others.
A premeditated murder is the most serious charge tried in our criminal courts.
So, perhaps he was just using the word to describe the part of us that does that, which everybody also happens to just call a conscience instead of saying their morally evaluative self-dialogue processy system.
Now, if, however, there's no reasonable doubt, then you must, in good conscience, Find the accused guilty.
So yeah, Freud and Adler are correct to some degree. Obviously, we have instincts we repress and we tend to want to move up the social hierarchy, but we are also watching ourselves do this as conscious human beings trying to make our life align with some other factor we call meaning. We can seek all the pleasure we want, and if it's not meaningful, it will seem empty.
This here? This what it's all about, Manny. Eating, drinking, fucking, sucking.
Come on.
Snoring. Then what? Then what?
We can also rise to the highest office in the land, but again, if it's not what we intrinsically want, all that power and responsibility will seem a bother. There's something else at play here, Frankl states. Something larger, something that can't really be seen and quantified, but can only be felt and experienced. And that something, whatever it is really important to us. But in terms of his theory in relation to other psychological theories, Frankl stresses that his theory should not be taken as some end-all be-all, but just another angle or dimension to consider our weird human condition within. He states that arguing which of the psychological theories is ultimately true or false is a waste of time, since the utter complexity of human reality and whatever lies beyond our understanding, which Frankl calls ultimate meaning and scientists or philosophers call objective reality, is too much for any of us to comprehend and will never be totally explained by any theory. That way our self-perception isn't distorted by some theorist's need to simplify our existence down into its spare parts, rendering us these pointless, cramping monkey things that sort of fell from outer space, which, at the end of the day, could possibly make us feel bad and like life is pointless. This is an example of what is called a noetic feedback loop, which we will get into later and discuss how ideas, whether they're true or false, can carry very real consequences. So we'll get into that later, but just keep that there for now. So instead of having psychological theories be opposed in this true or false reality battle, they can instead just be complementary truths. This is also the idea of dialectical thinking, that we can take things presented to us as opposites and instead examine them as parts of a larger whole, which, logotherapy aside, might be good practice for all of us so we don't have to watch bicycle messengers battle guys with Viking hats and trash can lids every 4 years. Frankl is quoted saying this: "We must remain aware of the fact that as long as absolute truth is not accessible to us, and it never will be, relative truths have to function as mutual correctives. Approaching the one absolute truth from various sides, sometimes even in opposite directions, we cannot attain it, but we may at least encircle it." That in mind, Frankl also states, quoting Kierkegaard, "He who has to offer a corrective should be one-sided, boldly one-sided, because such one-sidedness is not only his right, but also his duty." So basically, develop your ideas and don't be afraid to share them. Just know you're always missing some of the pieces and remain open to adjusting your worldview, because none of us ever truly know what's really going on in the grand absolute sense that we claim to know things in. So basically, no need to be a dick about what we think we know. Our time can be better spent alleviating the vast amount of human suffering in our own lives, as well as the lives of other people we meet and encounter. But that's getting a little too far ahead of ourselves. In the next video, we'll be getting into the nuts and bolts of logotherapy, specifically looking at what has happened to our larger sources of meaning and how we can break this big idea of meaning down into manageable chunks.